The most successful games come from really strong core vision of what the game's going to be and being willing to, go to work for 5 years or whatever it is to make that happen. And then you also have to combine that with market opportunities. And I think oftentimes studios are good at one or the other, hard to be good at both.
Adam Lieb is CEO of Gamesight, a marketing intelligence platform for the video game industry.
Content creators, YouTube, TikTok, Twitch is the number one way players either discover the games they're going to play or make the purchase decision. It's sort of logical in that, you imagine, hey, there's this new game coming out that I've heard of, maybe I'm interested in it. I could go watch someone on Twitch play it for 45 minutes and see what it's like and make your own informed decision. And so in a lot of ways, it's the modern version of try before you buy.
Can you share a bit more about how you recruited your global teams and which countries they're based in?
We're a global business. Our customers are global. And so we want to have people that are global in their time zone and language and all of those type of things to be supportive of our customers all over the world. So we're thoughtful about that specifically.
What would you say that most game studios get wrong about marketing their games?
Most advice you hear is good, but you mostly shouldn't listen to it. Trying to rely on other people's wise words is probably closer to a coin flip than anything else.
Adam, welcome to Founders Empanadas, my friend. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So today I'd love to do a deep dive into the gaming space and also just follow your entrepreneurial journey. We've got a couple gaming studios that are listening in. I think they'd really love learning more from your background. And, let's get at it. So, most 11-year-olds, they're busy playing games, but you were actually building a gaming business and even sold one and sold your website to IGN as a kid. And I just love to learn a little bit more into kind of how did you turn something big enough that IGN wanted to buy? And maybe was there a spark or a mentor that set you up on that entrepreneurial path so early on in your life?
Yeah, I talk about a bunch of those different things. I think the first is I'm an adult and I've been a career entrepreneur. So you go back and kind of tell your life story through that lens. It looks a little different than it did at the time, but I can remember being 11 and I didn't think I certainly couldn't spell the word entrepreneur. I didn't fancy myself one or a founder or anything. It really was just a hobby that I was passionate about and invested a lot of time into. And it turned into sort of a business, but I wouldn't have even, I don't even know that I would have called it a business, to be totally honest, at that time. I think if you'd asked me, to me, it was a website. It was something I did with my friend. It was because you said, I played a lot of video games. I love video games. And it was early internet days. It was the 90s. So the internet was still new. The resources available to us now didn't all exist then. And it was something that, we were passionate about doing, which was basically writing guides on how to beat video games, how you get all the stars in Mario 64, things like that. That was kind of the thesis behind the website was trying to consolidate that information. Because at the time, a lot of that type of tips and tricks and guide stuff, they were on AOL. They didn't call them forums technically back then, but they were these AOL news board type things where you'd have someone write a thing and people could respond to it, but it was messy. And so it was just an idea, and it wasn't I know we're going to make a bunch of money doing this, or this is going to be our career. It wasn't anything like that. It was hey, this is something we're doing that will be fun. The website got big enough that, we had ads on it and, it made some money. But I think it taught us a lot about not really entrepreneurship and how you start and build a business, but just about how you follow your passion and do things that you want to do. With the stupid if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life or whatever. And I don't know that I fully internalized it back then, but I do now. That was if you follow. If you think to yourself, what do I want to do today? And you find a way that the thing that you're doing is the thing that also pays for your life, then I think you'll be a lot happier. And so I learned that at an early age, I guess unintentionally, but that's probably the thing I took most from it. And, I didn't have a mentor or anything in those days. Again, I really didn't think about it as a business. In a lot of ways, it's sad, but it was video games were cool back then the way they are now. So we didn't talk about it. It wasn't a thing at school where everyone's oh yeah, Adam, he's the video game guy. I was quiet about that stuff for a really long time. It's so different now. It's funny, I have two 11-year-old kids myself. So it was the same age, and I see them in school and everyone plays video games. There's not a kid, boys, girls, all of them. They all play video games now, and they talk about it at school. They play games on the bus. Like they're it's such a part of the culture of like being a kid is gaming, and it just wasn't in back in the day, as my son would say, for me. So no, it was kind of my like private hobby that turned into enough of a business, I guess. But yeah, I think that answers all the different parts of your question.
Yeah, I felt the same pain points, in the '90s of, having to buy the physical strategy guide books or, yeah, those AOL boards to find out where the heck to go. But yeah, love that background.
Yeah, or the hotline. You'd have to call Nintendo Hotline, and you pay $3 a minute or whatever it was to get that stuff. So yeah, ours was a free resource.
Have you seen that video of the Nintendo Hotline of the guy kinda playing Zelda mid conversation? That's, pretty epic.
Yeah. I mean, that was, in a lot of ways what we were competing with. But as a free resource, yeah, it's a different time. Different time. My like kids can't even like conceive that the world worked that way.
Totally. And, your previous start, Duckster, was pitched as the LinkedIn for gamers, and, you raised millions from VC. Um, I'd love to hear just can you talk more about what happened with Duckster and maybe what were the biggest lessons from that venture that you carried into founding Gamesight?
Yeah, it was an interesting one. It's like all of these things you do in your life. Hopefully you learn lots of where the idea sounded so good. It still sounds good to me. The idea was it was like early, 20 aughts. And the idea was social networks and social media was rising, was becoming like the sort of main way people spent time online, and that places like Facebook just aren't where you want to kind of live your gamer life was the term we coined and used. And so we wanted to have a place where you could talk about games, connect with gamers, and kind of do your gaming social media stuff that was pan gaming, right? It was no matter what kind of games you played, whether it was early days in mobile gaming, but it was sort of the time when you were starting to see people weren't just like I'm an Xbox gamer or a PlayStation gamer. People were gamers. They played games. We call them capital G gamers. It was gamer was sort of part of your identity, and the product was successful from like consumer standpoint in that we had millions of users. We just were never able to really make a business out of it. And at the end of the day, most social networks, maybe all of them, exist on ad revenue, and you need the volume you need to make that feasible is just so high. So millions of users is like a drop in the bucket. If you're not talking about hundreds of millions at the time, like it just wasn't relevant. So we ended up in essence like pivoting the entire business to a B2B business, where what we were doing is started working with game studios, and it eventually gets into kind of like the my career now. But we were working with game studios to help them build social tools around their games. So rather than the concept of like a third party social network, like LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever, if you went to you're a big Call of Duty player, there might be like all these Call of Duty social tools that you can engage with, and so we pivoted into that kind of like B2B software space, which is I've been around gaming and doing gaming stuff for forever, but it was the first time I started working directly with game companies and helping them as opposed to building the consumer products. And these things obviously touch consumers. The customer was a game company, and that was learning an entirely new type of business where everything I'd done before that was figuring out how to sell stuff to consumers. This was how you sell stuff to businesses. So yeah, it was a huge change in my life, but ultimately a successful one. So yeah, that was kind of the rise and fall of the Duckster era.
I think it's a great idea as well. I mean, most gaming communities right now just live in their own subreddits or Discord groups, and there isn't a more broad range.
I think Discord's the best thing. Like honestly, like Discord is probably the closest thing to how we envisioned it. What's funny is I remember when Discord started. Knew one of the founders and actually played their previous game that they pivoted and ultimately Discord. I remember when they first started Discord, and we had a mobile app that was. We were basically trying to make the decision of like, do we pivot more into chat versus more asynchronous, like news feeds, forums, that type of stuff. And we ended up not doing the chat thing, which is also what Discord did and was massively successful. And we certainly weren't. So they were right. But I think when I look at it now, Discord is the closest thing to kind of what our vision was of Duxer. It's a place for a lot of gamers. It's not the only thing to choose for, but for a lot of gamers, that is their hub. They go from game to game, from community to community. They have their friends list is pervasive. You have the same friends whether you're in the Call of Duty community or the Fortnite community. It doesn't have all the features that I think we believed in and thought were important. It's chat based and VoIP based, useful features, but not everything. But obviously, they've been super successful. So excited that we now work closely with Discord. They're a great partner of ours, and they're really helpful to game studios as well. So funny how the things kind of they diverge and converge over time.
For gamers, and then also for the tech companies that are sick of Slack and want to move over to Discord.
Yeah, I have heard people do that.
Got a couple partners we work with on our end that are also they're the Discord companies.
Okay.
Yep. So, Adam, I'm actually meeting with a publisher. Gonna eat some empanadas with him later today. He's a former Blizzard guy and started Frost Giant.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious with all these publishers that you work with now, um, what what advice would you give to a founder that's early on in their publishing, starting their own game studio? What advice would you give them to really be able to differentiate across such a crowded market?
That's a tough one. I think that there's no shortage of like free advice online, but I think the thing that is probably most true to me is that the most successful games come from really strong visions of the type of game the studio wants to build, and whether that's one creative that has had this vision forever, or they worked at another failed studio and they said, okay, we got all these things wrong and I know how to get it right. But that having that really strong core vision of what the game's going to be, and being willing to go to work for 5 years or whatever it is to make that happen. So it's sort of that you have to have that, and then you also have to combine that with a market opportunity, and some of the sort of business fundamentals. And I think oftentimes studios are good at one or the other. It's hard to be good at both. You get the sort of more business focused, hey, I know what type of game we should build. We're going to have a bunch of MBAs build a matrix, and they're going to find the weaknesses in the market, and it should be a first person shooter, but it should be free to play, and it should have heroes, and you can kind of build a Frankenstein version of a game off spreadsheets, and it'll look good and it'll look like it'll make a lot of money, but then the kind of the heart and soul and vision is just never there because it didn't start that way. Or sometimes you get the this is the game I want to build, irrespective of anything else, and it's this is an awesome game for the 37 people who really want to play it and no one else. And so combining those two things, super hard. And if there was some magic formula, I'd be happy to share it, but I don't know that exists. But I think that is I think at least at the outset, having a plan for how we're going to do both, how we're going to both bring in people that really understand the vision and the mission. I think about a game like Path of Exile, right, where it's the mission of that game is so clear. The people that Chris Wilson, people who started the studio and tried to build the game, this is the type of game we want to build. We want to build, basically we want to, Diablo 2 doesn't exist anymore, sort of we want to build the Diablo 2 as though it, kept going on in this, action RPG that has all of these live service elements, which were sort of new at the time. That was so clear. That was the game they were trying to build, and they knew exactly who they were building it for. They're building it for people who loved Diablo and loved, dungeon crawler action RPGs, but wanted a game that they could play for, infinite hours in essence. And they were able to do that and be massively successful. The company sold for hundreds of millions of dollars to Tencent. So I think having that, this is the type of game we want to build, and this is how we want to build it, and these are the type of people we're going to recruit to do it, but then also figuring out how to have a business that makes sense. It's tough to do and oftentimes requires different people in different disciplines. So I don't know how useful that is. Maybe it's just obvious, you have to build a good game and you have to have a reasonably smart business behind it. But I find that studios often have one of those two modes figured out, and the other one, sometimes they wait till too late to try to bootstrap the other piece.
It's an example though with Path of Exile. The Diablo 3 definitely wasn't filling that void for players, and just having you already have a defined market, and you know what that gamer profile looks like, it works.
PoE came out years before Diablo 3. I don't have the dates on top of my head, but it came out years before. So it actually really did fill that gap for years between D2 and D3. And what's funny is when Diablo 3 came out, Path of Exile sales went up. there are more players, and I don't think it's because people hated Diablo 3. I think there are a lot of new players, I know, a dungeon crawler, ARPG players that played Diablo 3 for something like, this is so cool. What else is out there? And then they find out there's this massively popular game and it's free. Oh, let me try it out. So oftentimes the rising tide lifts all boats with games, and people think it's like zero sum. Oh, I'm only going to play one or the other. But if it's a great game and it's in a genre other people play, it's probably good for you.
So let's fast forward to today with Gamesight. Marketing video games, it's really become a big challenge. You got influencer campaigns and Discord communities and TikTok ads and the whole playbook. But what would you say that most game studios get wrong about marketing their games?
That's a tough one because there's so many different things, and so trying to like summarize the one, I'd say like, I don't know if this is the most common necessarily, but it's probably the biggest, like the one that hurts the most, is not recognizing the uniqueness of the game in the market and the players, and how that maps to marketing, GTM, publishing, whatever you want to call it. Because I think that oftentimes there's this like, and it's smart people that are like, I know I want to do best practices. I want to like, influencers are important. We should work with influencers, and TikTok's important. We should do TikTok. And well, sure, those things are generally true. There are some games that, because of the nature of the games, are going to be better TikTok. You're going to make better TikTok content, and there are games where maybe that's just maybe awesome games, but just not going to make great TikTok content. Sort of super simple example is the number one, kind of by engagement type of game on TikTok is horror games. And horror is not, I don't know where it is in the genre rankings, but it's like not one of the top ones. It's like the shooters and RPGs and stuff. It's like much lower than that, but it's the biggest on TikTok. The reasons probably somewhat debatable, but like, it's generally that watching people like to watch other people get freaked out playing video games, and that like reaction content of people like screaming or standing up and running away or all that stuff is just funny and engaging, and people watch it and scroll it or whatever. So if you're making a horror game, your TikTok strategy should be different than if your game is an FPS. And I think that certainly not always, but oftentimes there's too much of a focus on like this, like, what's the platonic form of a good game launch, or based on being an indie game, or based on being a $20 game, or whatever, without the sort of uh, understanding of the specific games and features and what is going to like kind of marry those two things together. And sometimes there's these big companies where you've got like publishing team over here and the dev team over here, and the publishing team sort of gets the game, and like, great, this is the product we have, how do we market this product? And I don't know, I think that not appreciating the uniqueness of your game and what that is going to do for your marketing strategy is probably the thing that gets, except maybe it's not the most common thing, but when it happens, it's usually bad. Like, it's hard to have a really successful, publishing strategy if the uniqueness of the game isn't like an important part of that conversation.
And I'm curious, going back to that example of horror games on TikTok, is that does TikTok usually actually convert for those publishers, or it's more just for building views and hype and maybe just people interested in seeing the reaction rather than the game itself?
Sure. I don't have this like the sort of stat off the top of my head. I don't have any reason to think that it's like going to convert massively, like better or worse than anything else. But the kind of like effective cost per the investment to the return is going to be higher because it scales so much better. Like, there's just, you put out a video, that, let's just say, it costs $1,000, and it's more likely to get 100,000 views than a relative RPG video where you spend $1,000 a video and it's more likely to get 10,000 views. Just making numbers up, but your dollars are going to go further because the engagement and the eyeballs there are so much higher. So even if the conversion rates, even if that's held constant, it will still perform, much better than another game. But I don't have like the specific conversion numbers off the top of my head.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose if it converts way worse, then it would be then you'd be right. It is a bad kind of investment, but I doubt that's the case.
And I'm also curious to dive a little bit deeper into the publishers that are listening, and they were able to ride the pandemic surge of gaming with during the lockdown. I'm just curious, from your perspective, how did the pandemic and then the post-pandemic shift affect the way game companies market their titles? And Did you have to change the game site strategies as player behavior swung up and down?
I think there was. I mean, there's like a bunch of it. Like COVID had these like a bunch of bizarre impacts. I'm sure to every industry, but I think in gaming, the biggest immediate impact was games didn't get released for a while. Like there was this time period, right, where you imagine everyone goes home from their offices. Not all games, but thinking AAA games, for example. Most AAA games are built until recently were built in offices. They were often built with lots of lock and key, and sometimes with gaming consoles that are not public yet. The dev boxes and stuff are all have to be in a highly secure environment. So now you send all these people home, and they literally can't do their jobs. Where there's a lot of us that doing our jobs at home or doing it at work is it's different, but it's not like I can still send emails and do Zoom calls and go on Google Docs or whatever, like which is most of my job. That didn't change. But if you have to be on a specific machine in a specific location, you can't go. You can't develop the game. So game development stops for some period of time. Well, companies are figuring this out. Okay, well, how can we get people back in the studio, and can we do it in shifts, and all of the crazy COVID stuff that we all remember. So that like creates this weird gap where there's like lots of people at home playing video games, but there's not really any new video games, and those games are all kind of impacted for some amount of months, 6 months or whatever, where like those games all get pushed, and so you get this weird interim effect where like then a bunch of games the next year get released. People are still at home. Generally, the COVID lockdowns were still throughout the world, still pretty hectic after that. So you have play is way up. A bunch of new releases. Those games are all hitting record numbers. They're selling a ton. They're making a ton of money. And then there's another gap where it's like, okay, well, normally things are kind of flighted like this, but they all get compressed into this window. And then there's this sort of interim effect. So COVID did all these weird things to like kind of gaming timelines in releases that I think that there's still some impacts of. I mean, what are we, 6 years later now? Not quite, but almost 6 years later. And I think there's still a little bit of that interim effect. A couple of the things that it did materially is because it changed release timelines, kind of definitionally. I think that people learned that you can release a game at any time of year and be successful in a way that I think pre-COVID, there was a lot more dogma around time of year, and you have to release it in this month to be successful. And a lot of that is old stuff. A lot of that is like brick and mortar, it has to be at Walmart and Best Buy in these times. And that kind of is, a lot of that went away. So I think it helped the industry challenge some assumptions, not on purpose, but, on accident, that are like, oh, cool, we can do that. Another thing would be, shows like E3, which used to be huge shows that people sort of expected helped games get on the radar and helped them sell through to retail and helped games be successful. Shows died. E3 doesn't exist anymore, and the tens to hundreds of millions of dollars that were invested in kind of showcasing games of those shows are now reallocated to other things, because it's like, well, we used to think that we had to do that. Now we didn't do it, and our game was still successful, so we obviously didn't have to do that. So I think that there's a lot of things, again, I'm sure this is true worldwide and industry-wide, where there are just some assumptions that were forced to be challenged. How are we ever going to release a game if we don't show it off at E3 this year? Well, when there's no E3, you don't have a choice. So you have to release a game without E3. And if the game's still, successful or more successful, it's easy to be like, did we really need to do that investment? So I think that some of that stuff got challenged and reallocated. But I don't know that there's anything like fundamentally changed other than some of those, and not that they're not important, but that's I think the release timelines and kind of the impact of certain shows, whether in-person shows or even digital shows, and like what that means to successfully launch a game.
I do definitely miss the days though of the midnight releases at GameSpot and being during the time of the year right before winter break or whatever. But yeah, it's totally natural. Just like most industries, as you said, they kind of evolved to let's just throw it on Steam, release it whenever.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and I think there's there's still opportunities for some of those things. I mean, there's no doubt that a lot of us, I guess, have learned or appreciate the value of in-person events and what that means to our lives. So I don't think that step is dead in any way, shape, or form. But I do think that the kind of autopilot of like, oh, well, this is just what we do. Some of that stuff went away, and those things have to be more intentional. But I mean, there's still, things like PAX still break records. Like we still have, more people that go to PAX this year than have ever met before. So it's not like that in-person stuff is dead, and it's changed.
Have you seen any game studios that have leveraged some sort of guerrilla marketing in-person event recently that really performed well, or any kind of creative marketing releases?
I think that there's a lot of the stuff ends up being at shows, you know, TwitchCon and Summer's Games Fest and TGAs. I mean, those are kind of like the shows and events where a lot of this is happening. I don't know that anything I can think of off the top of my head that was like super kind of guerrilla style. Um, but people are also looking for leverage. So like I'm pretty much every event I just mentioned, a big part of that is like press and influencer. It's like trying to how do we get those people, sure, getting 10,000 gamers to come to my booth at a show is cool, but getting 100 press and influencers at my booth who are going to reach 10 million gamers versus the 10,000 who weren't, maybe half of them tell their friends, 15,000. Like it's the scale is so different. I think some of that has changed. Just looking at dollars in dollars out and going, well, this is maybe a better use for money. So I see a lot more of those things. I see a lot more kind of creator impress focused events. I wouldn't call any of that like kind of particularly guerrilla style. That tends to be whatever the opposite of guerrilla is, planned and more corporate, I guess.
Small, howler monkey, I guess, marketing.
Yeah,
Um,
guerrilla.
and I guess on top of influencer marketing, does Gamesight work with Twitch streamers, and how big of a role does that play with helping to boost view eyeballs on releases?
Yeah, it's a big part of our business. It's a big part of game releases. For not for every game and not for every genre, but for a lot of the big ones, both the genres and games. Content creators, YouTube, TikTok, Twitch are the number one way players either discover the games they're going to play or make the purchase decision. And it's not for those that aren't like ultra familiar with it, it's sort of logical in that, you imagine, hey, there's this new game coming out that I've heard of. Maybe I'm interested in it. I could go watch someone on Twitch play it for 45 minutes and see what it's like. And, sure, you can listen to what they say about it and take their kind of like review and feedback. This game's fun. Okay, I can take that. But you also just watch it and make your own informed decision. And so, in a lot of ways, it's the like modern version of try before you buy. It's not you playing it yourself, but it's you watching someone else play it and go, oh, yeah, this, I think these graphics look good. Or I think that this, game mechanic that I didn't know existed is cool and it looks fun. And, I've got hundreds of people, thousands of people potentially in the chat sharing their opinions. And you can kind of make a much more informed decision about, do I want to spend my money on this game or my time on this game? So it is a really awesome form of, game marketing because it's not, it doesn't just rely on, did you make a great, commercial that looks cool? And did you, catch someone's attention with a poppy ad as they quickly scroll by? It is your game in the rawest form generally being played and watched. That's scary. Some games they'd rather not do that. It's like, I'd rather you buy it before you try it. And then I think other ones, it's like, hey, yeah, let me try before I buy. So yeah, it's a huge part of our business and it's a huge part of the industry. And I just think I do believe in kind of like like the fundamental power of showing people the product before they spend their hard-earned money buying it.
Absolutely. All right, I think we can take a little empanada intermission.
I've got them, so I went ready to
All right, let's dive in. Salud. Cheers.
cheers. Okay, what do we got here? Yeah, apple.
Nice. How does it compare to the American empanada of Bull Pop Tarts?
I mean, it's better than Pop Tart, but it is. It's kind of like what's like the McDonald's like apple pie, right? But an apple pie, it's basically just an empanada, right?
Awesome, Adam. Well, let's change course, and I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into global staffing and how you've built your team at Gamesight. So a lot of our audience members, they're curious about, what are the best emerging countries for sourcing talent? Can you share a bit more about how you recruited your global teams and which countries they're based in?
Yeah, for sure. So there's sort of like two types of roles, right? There's roles that are call it geo agnostic, and then ones they're geo specific. We're a global business. We have customers. I don't know. I couldn't list, but probably every country that has more than 5 game studios, we probably operate in. And so our customers are global, and so we want to have people that are global in our time zone and language and all of those type of things to be supportive of our customers all over the world. So we're thoughtful about that specifically, but then we also have roles that are like kind of like doesn't matter where you are. And I think that has been a big boost for us in terms of like talent quality. We used to be pre-COVID. We used to have an office in Seattle. We were kind of right underneath the Space Needle. It was a cool office, and I liked it. But we could basically only hire people who lived, I don't know, call it 20 minutes or less, probably from the Space Needle. And Seattle's a pretty decent tech hub and gaming hub, but there's two bridges that connect the city to the east side where the suburbs are. So that's where like Microsoft is, and Valve and Nintendo and like lots of studios, and people broadly aren't going to drive across the bridge to work at my tiny startup. So your talent pool is this little tiny thing, and you didn't really think about it a lot at the time. But now looking back, it's like, geez, we needed to hire a new engineer, and we were recruiting from a pool of however many thousands and competing directly with Amazon and Google and Facebook, all who had offices walking distance from our office. Where now, sure, we still compete with lots of companies too for hires, but we're looking at a talent pool of I don't know the number, but millions of engineers rather than single digit thousands. So having that kind of global filter has definitely changed the talent quality. I mean, you have different problems. I mean, we get thousands of job applications for pretty much every job we post. So it kind of creates a different problem of how you filter and how you make sure that you're kind of getting the best. But yeah, that's been a huge, for the sort of like global talent, like geo agnostic roles. It's been huge. When we're hiring, hey, we need to hire a I don't know, influencer expert in France who speaks French. Obviously, it's still not, we don't have to be in one specific office, but that's going to be a narrow filter because it's important for us for that, even for that particular role, to have someone who can go to game studios in Paris and obviously is, a native speaker. So, yeah, I think that's how we think about both of those things, and it's been huge for us. I mean, the business has grown a lot, and some of it is just the nature of timing of the business. But since we've gone to that global remote workforce, the business has grown a ton.
Yeah. And how's the just company culture of Gamesight adjusted since you've moved from in-office to remote and globally distributed? And on top of that, maybe what are some best practices you can share for maintaining strong culture with a distributed team across multiple time zones?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, at Gamesite, we had pre-COVID, I don't know the exact number off the top of my head. We had like 9 people or something, like 9 or 10 people maybe when kind of COVID hit, and we're, I don't know, 55 or something now. So, I mean, it's changed a lot, and a lot of it was going to change no matter what, just going from that size, from 10 to 55 or whatever. It's just a big change. But I think the thing that, sort of like have like what would it be like if we were all in offices, this like alternate universe. But the way that we decided to, I guess, like emphasize be thoughtful and intentional about culture, I think was enabled by the remoteness of it all in a way that I think if we were in an office, we wouldn't have done it. So like there's something about when you're all in an office where I think some of those things are just like, oh, they'll work themselves out. You don't need to be intentional about it. And when we obviously made the remote decision, we said, okay, well, we don't want to just have a company, where people have jobs. You want people to feel like they work, that they work at a company, that there's this collective cohesive thing, not like I, clock in and do my job and clock out. And I think remote work can feel like that without thought and intentionality. And I think we knew that, and so like, okay, well, what can we do to be intentional about this? And so in a lot of ways, I think it was a forcing function to be really thoughtful about how we were building the culture that maybe without it, we wouldn't have done, and the culture would be much worse for it. So I'm glad in a lot of ways. But yeah, we're super thoughtful about it. I mean, it's a huge, it's funny. I think about it a lot, how as the CEO, of a growing company, but a small company and then a medium size and a large or whatever, like your job changes so much and the things you care about change so much. I can tell you that a lot of the cultural things that are now top priorities for me, like weren't things I even weren't even in my top 100 priorities, 5 years ago or whatever. And so those things change. Well, being a great place to work. I mean, honestly, like when we had 8 people, I was not like, I never thought about, geez, how can we make sure that this company is a great place for these 8 people to work? No, it was, how do we build the product people want, and how do we sell it, and how do we pay the bills, and all of the startup things that you're focused on. Now, the how do we build a company that people want to work at, which, for recruiting and talent, that people want to work here. And then how do we build a company that people want to stay at? Because if you hire great people, but they just leave, that's a huge problem. So the, the priority of those things is just super high. It doesn't mean we always get it right. It doesn't mean that there aren't, those are still really hard to do, in a hyper competitive global market. But that being a priority and a thought and a thing I have meetings about every week, and we have constant initiatives for on things that we're doing that we think will make increase employee satisfaction or whatever, and thinking a little bit about the company as a product to the employees is something that just, again, wouldn't have even crossed my radar as a thing to be doing however many years ago. And now it's up there with my most important things.
I love that. It's almost seeing, employees as another form of customers and how to best serve them from like the onboarding journey of hiring to the ongoing experience. And have there been any initiatives that you and the team have tried out that you really felt like moved the needle on employee experience and retention?
Yeah, I mean, sure, there's a bunch of things. I mean, one of the things we do is a yearly uh, in real life get together. The whole company comes to one place, and we all do stuff for a few days. And I think that in person connection is really important in what we do there and how we reinforce culture and how we build bonds and relationships that are going to last people. I think is super important. But we also, I think, in a lot of ways, like we've recruited people who I would say broadly want to work from home. I mean, there are a lot of people who want to work in offices, and they don't apply to work here, or they shouldn't, because it's not they're not getting what they want out of it. So finding the right balance of like, we have people that are comfortable where they live in their daily lives and aren't like, hey, let me travel all the time and go do things. And that's part of the, kind of perk of working here, so that you don't have to do all that stuff. But doing that once a year, we have found is like kind of the right amount where people are happy to do it. I know there's a lot of introverts that leave our all hands event very drained and sleep for 4 days straight after that, which is fine. But I think uh, some people are recharged from that. But I think for a lot of people, they build those, again, like the relationships and kind of reinforcement of culture and what the company is about during those times. So that would be one. It started small, however many 4 or 5 years ago we first started doing it, and it's grown each year, both in terms of the number of people who come and the kind of like scale and scope of it all. So that would be an example. And a lot of it is around. I mean, I already said it. It's a lot is reinforcing the culture and like what the company is about, and finding ways to do that. And you can write things on a wall, and you can put things on people's onboarding, and you can repeat things. I think those are all important to do. But sometimes, kind of seeing it and feeling it is a certain type of thing. And so I think that's been really impactful there. But then also, like I said, building the personal relationships, because for some people, a coworker is just a name in Slack, and maybe you see him on calls sometimes, but having you know, a shared experience with them where we always do games and, it sounds lame, team building events, but, stuff that people will work on together. And that gives you something to kind of fall back on when you're, kind of back in the digital office and there's something hard or scary or whatever. And you're like, oh, well, I know a little more about this person because I got to, have a drink with them and spend time with them together rather than just as kind of a sometimes faceless name in Slack.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a big proponent of getting everyone together as well. We did a lot of new work, and it goes a long way just like give people more context too. Like, what are other departments working on really? Like, how can I connect with people that, again, to your point, aren't just a Slack face? How do I can like really understand what their pain points are in the organization?
Oh, and getting to know people as people too. And I think that's one of the things that remote work is harder to do because you have to be so intentional. I mean, here's like another thing we do. It's not like a crazy thing, but we have for new employees. I think they do two. They at least do one called lunch roulette, where they in their first week, everyone gets like Uber Eats gift cards or something, and then you sit on a call during lunch hour with, I don't know, 4 people or 5 people in all different departments and different in like they're pseudo random, and you do it a couple different times to get to know people. And the point of that call is not let's sit and talk about like our project priorities or whatever. Like it's personal, and it's like you need to know who people are and what they're about and their families. And I think that trying to humanize a little more, because if you don't do that intentionally, it's not going to happen accidentally. I mean, you're not going to send an IM to a stranger at a company you just started working on and go like, "Hey, tell me about your kids." Like people don't do operate that way. I don't think that's too weird. So, trying to find, in some ways it's forced and sometimes it's awkward where it's like, "Hey, you've got to like get to know each other a little bit." And I think that stuff also really helps to see people as human beings, not just as senior project coordinator or whatever it appears on their job title or LinkedIn or whatever. So yeah, it's that you like I said, we we are really intentional about a lot of that stuff. Doesn't mean we always get it right, but it does mean that we at least are thoughtful about how you do those things and making sure that it's not all just left to chance.
Absolutely. How's the empanada coming along?
Yep, yep, it's sweet.
Well, on yeah, it's the theme of today is Pop Tarts, so gotta get something sweet.
Yeah, it's yeah, toaster strudel adjacent. Yeah.
Awesome, Adam. Well, this is a question I like to ask all of our founders that come on. What's one strongly held belief that you have that you think 99% of other founders would disagree with?
I don't know that I have a great answer for this, but one of the things that I do think about a lot is how like most advice you hear is good, but you mostly shouldn't listen to it. In that you can find almost any type of like, I don't know, startup business advice where you can almost always find a book, a quote, someone famous, important who said like the opposite. So it's like both versions like can be true, but you probably should just ignore both of them and figure it out yourself. And I think that smart people try to wisely rely on other people's thoughts and wisdom. Oh, what if I read this book or I talk to this person or I, hear their speech and like I can take their advice and it'll save me time. But I find that it's like 50-50 on whether that stuff will ever be. And it's not because those people are dumb or whatever, but like the context around any piece of advice is so nuanced that unless you're so good at applying that to your own facts, you're sort of taking the advice but for the wrong thing. I think about like there's you find 50 different versions of startup quotes around focus, where like find one thing, laser focus, block everything else out. Totally reasonable advice. You can also find a million quotes around how startups are around flexibility and being opportunistic and being willing to pivot, and it's like those two things are diametrically opposed. They're both fine pieces of advice. They're also you'd probably be better off never thinking about either of those two things and figuring out what you should be doing, whether it's kind of uh focusing on the being unrelenting about your idea and vision, or going, hey, this isn't a good idea, maybe I should pivot. You've got to figure that out for yourself. And I think trying to rely on other people's again, maybe perfectly reasonable, thoughtful, wise words is probably closer to a coin flip than anything else. So I don't know, most people would disagree with that or not.
Amazing, Adam. Well, where can people find out more about you and Gamesight online?
I, I don't know. I mean, I'm on probably LinkedIn's probably the best. Is the lamest as lame as that sounds. LinkedIn's probably the best for me personally. I'm sort of broadly off of Twitter these days. I have an account or whatever. I broadly not don't spend a lot of time there. And I mean, certainly learning about the company and stuff. Our website's fine. There's lots of articles written. So Google is a fine, or ChatGPT, wherever people's default searches these days. But I think, LinkedIn is my personal, people add me and, send me DMs and stuff. I generally respond. So that's, again, as lame as it is, probably my platform of choice.
Well, Adam, thanks again so much for coming on today and sharing some empanadas with me and wishing you and the Gamesight team the very best.
Thanks. Have a good one. Appreciate it.
Cheers.